In April 2005, in a hotel lobby in Switzerland, I shared a bottle of wine with a really close friend, Martin Barry. And Martin, that night, handed me his adoption certificate and asked me if I would one day try to find his birth mother and tell her about him. Because although Martin was a great journalist, his own story was the one that he never managed to uncover. All he knew for certain was that he was born in Bedsborough Mother and Baby Home in Cork, a place that was synonymous with great suffering for thousands of women, girls, and babies who passed through its door. He gave me that document that night because this was our final drink together. And we both knew that the following morning we would make our way to an apartment a few streets away where I would hold his hand as he died. I'm here as a really poor substitute for Martin today because I know how much he would have loved to be here telling you his story himself, so I am going to try. 4 years before that night, we were journalists living in Cork. He was my boyfriend. Height of the Celtic Tiger, Ireland had just qualified for the World Cup. And we decided to move to Tokyo so that we could teach English, but write for publications back home in the run-up to the tournament. And it was great. Martin later said about the time that this photo was taken in a little photo booth in Tokyo that he felt he was living the dream. But a few weeks later, he began to feel pains in his arms and his legs, and numbness in his feet. He began to lose his balance. He fell down a flight of stairs and was admitted to hospital. But he kept working through it all. But by the time his brother came over to see us to go to the first match, Martin was struggling to get up the steps of the stadium. A couple of weeks later, he collapsed and we had a medical evacuation back to Cork, where he was diagnosed with a very rare but very aggressive form of MS, which had done huge damage to his nervous system by the time he was diagnosed. So in the space of that year, 2002, he went from being an able-bodied young man who loved nights out to becoming disabled. And he described that to me at the time as being asked to leave a really great party for reasons you don't understand, but then being forced to watch in the window because it's all still going on, but you're standing in the cold. The first day we went into Cork city centre using the wheelchair, he described how strange it was to be so conspicuous and yet so invisible at the same time. You know, people's eyes are drawn towards me because of the wheelchair, and then they look away like they haven't seen me, or they look at you. And for a man who loved attention, craved the limelight, it was devastating to become an image that some people found so uncomfortable. And he began to spiral into a very dark place in the months that followed, and our relationship began to unravel as well. In 2003, the following year, I left him and moved back to Northern Ireland. Because his world was too difficult to live in. He moved back with his mother and his lovely mother and brother who did their best for him. And Martin and I became very close friends. But none of us were equipped to pull him out of the dark place that he was in. He attempted to take his own life and woke up on the bathroom floor, even more unwell now due to the cocktail of drugs that he had taken. And it was around that time that he began to research Dignitas and decided that that was how he was going to end his life. I strongly disagreed with him. I tried to talk him out of that. I met him the night before he left. We had an argument in a hotel, and I let him travel there alone and deeply regretted it. But he returned from that journey alive, and he returned from that journey a very changed person. He explained to me that knowing that that was there for him had released him from the fear that had prevented him from living his life. I think everybody saw a change in him after that. He threw a big party for his 30th birthday, invited all his friends, all the journalists up from Dublin, and he absolutely loved the attention that he got that night. And I remember sitting watching him, holding court and laughing and joking, and I realized this isn't my decision to make, it's his. And all I can do is support him. Martin was a great writer. Even his emails sometimes read like literature. And he emailed me a month before we left to reassure me about his decision. He said, "Laura, I've done more living in 30 years than some people do in 70. So many people are just existing in their lives, scared to say what they really think in case they're judged, scared to say sorry when they're wrong in case they look weak, scared to forgive in case they're hurt again, scared to love in case they lose it. I have lived and loved and learned from it all, and I'm not just existing in the way that I was last year. Because taking control of my death has helped me to start living again. I just wish there was more time to appreciate the way that I see life now, because even in this broken body, I feel stronger than I ever did. But it's time to go." The morning after we shared that bottle of wine, Martin was helped onto a bed in the Dignitas clinic. He smoked a cigarette for the first time in a couple of years, and the staff left us alone. And in the old Irish tradition, he asked me if I would open the window of the room so his soul wouldn't get trapped. Love the Swiss, Laura. They're brilliant. They're great. Love them. I just don't want to get stuck with them for all eternity. And I lay beside him on the bed, and we talked, and then he fell silent. And I asked him what he was feeling, and he said happy. That was his final word. I have avoided expressing an opinion on assisted dying for the 20 years since that day, partly because my own mind hasn't been fully made up, and I can understand the concerns on both sides. But I do believe he was happy in that moment. And more importantly, I believe he was happy in the months leading up to that moment. And sometimes I look back and still find the circumstances of his birth more disturbing than the circumstances of his death, because his death was peaceful. In 2022, I had the huge privilege of meeting Martin's birth mother. And she told me how she had thought about him and prayed for him for 47 years, desperately wanted to meet him, just like he wanted to meet her. And the whole time they were just living down the road from each other in the same county, just a bus ride away. But conversations were shut down, information was denied. I don't understand what there was to fear from bringing these two incredible people together so they could love each other. But fear is a really strong emotion that shuts down conversations that are uncomfortable and situations that are uncomfortable. 10 years ago, my son was a massive fan of Star Wars. I'm no sci-fi fan, so I didn't always enjoy those bedtime stories. But there was this one line that stuck with me for years because it reminded me of the email that Martin sent me all those years before. It was a Yoda line, he gets all the best lines. And he said he was trying to teach Luke Skywalker about the dark side. And he said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. I was afraid of doing this talk. On a very basic level, I was afraid that my mouth might dry up and I might have to go off the stage and ask for some water. But on a greater level, I was afraid that in sharing Martin's story that I might provoke fear in people who don't want to hear it, and then maybe that, fear turns to anger and that might lead to hateful comments or online. And I've had a very peaceful 2025, so why would I do that? But if we don't share our stories, we don't learn from them. I know that this is an uncomfortable conversation. I know that if Martin was standing here today, he would say that he made the right decision for him. That in taking control of his death, that he was able to live his life. Does that make it right for everyone? Of course it doesn't. But that's why we need to talk about this. When I boarded the plane the day after he died, I was overwhelmed with anxiety about what had just happened and what might happen in Dublin Airport. But when all the other passengers took their seats on that packed plane, I looked around me and realized that the only empty seat on that flight was the one right beside me. And as the plane took off, I put my hand on that seat and I cried, but I was smiling through the tears because I took that as a sign that I hadn't left him behind in that room, that his soul had made it out through that window and he was coming home and he was at peace. Thank you.